Shalom, peace and blessings. Welcome to the Fourth Angels Learning Center. I'm Jadiel, and today's is going to be an in-depth study. We're going to be covering the 3 days and 3 nights idea of the Messiah's statement that he made in Matthew. We're going to make sure that we clarify these things. There's so many issues that's going wrong with the calculation of the calendar. People trying to incorporate the idea of 3 days, 3 nights in the time frame that he died. So we're going to cover all of those things. There's a few calendar study videos that we have put out already. I need you guys to go check those out, so that way there won't be any confusion with this one. So we're going to cover a lot of figurative statements, and there's a big importance of why the figurative statements are important to recognize, because many times Messiah is speaking in a certain parable, and certain doctrines are created because they think it's a literal statement. So they think it's a plain literal statement. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at his statements to see what he meant by those specific statements, such as 3 days, 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So, of course, I'm under the side that believe that this is a figurative statement. It's not a literal statement, nor is it a Hebrew idiom. And I'm going to show you why. So we're going to start let's look at, let me pull up scriptures. All right. So we're going to start in Matthew chapter 13. Matthew chapter 13, he gives you the premise, telling you how he will approach everybody amongst the Pharisees and Sadducees, how he is going to speak to them, etc., etc. So look at what he says. We're going to start here in verse 2. It says, the great multitudes were gathered together unto him, so that he went into the ship and sat. And the whole multitude stood by the shore, and he spoke many things unto them in parables, it says. Now, everybody knows he spoke in parables, but it's not that he just simply spoke in parables. He made it clear he wasn't going to speak in any other way besides parables to everyone other than his disciples. So let's look at what else he says. His disciples came and asked him, why do you speak to them in parables? He answered and said, because it was given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it was not given. So he's not going to approach anyone outside of his disciples, his students, with any plain statements. All of his statements are going to be centered around parables because of this particular prophecy right here. Verse 12 of Matthew 13, it says, whosoever have to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance, but whosoever have not, from him shall be taken away, even that he has. Therefore speak I unto them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. This is the fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah, which says, by hearing you shall hear and shall not understand, and seeing you shall see and shall not perceive, because this people's heart is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. But then he says in verse 16, blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. So it says, verily I say to you that many of the prophets and righteous men have desired to see those things which you see and have not seen them, and to hear those things which you hear and have not heard them. So very important. And then he continues with another parable. So he's explaining to them he will not speak outside of this to anyone outside of the circle that he has, the disciples, the students that he's raising up to be future teachers. But let's solidify this point. Let's look at Matthew chapter 13, verse 34 and 35. It says, all these things spake Yahushua unto the multitude in parables. And this is it. And without parable spake he not unto them, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables, and I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world. Very important. Very important. So, with this being said, we understand now clearly that he is not approaching any Pharisees, Sadducees, any multitude, anyone in the multitude, anybody, any student, Nicodemus came to him. There was many parables that was mentioned to keep the prophecy, to continue the prophecy, or to allow the prophecy to fulfill in his ministry. So when we get to the space with the 3 days and 3 nights, look at who's speaking to him. Look at who's asking him. So it says, then certain of the scribes and of the Pharisees answered him and said, Master, we want to see a sign from you. So who was speaking to him? The scribes and the Pharisees. According to what we just saw, according to what the Messiah said himself and the prophecy in the book of Isaiah, he is not going to speak to them directly, nor is he going to say any Hebrew idiom that they will be familiar with, because he is speaking secrets that is supposed to be hidden for a time and is only for his disciples to understand. So what does he say in response to the asking of a sign of the scribes and Pharisees? He says, an evil and adulterous generation looks for a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it but the sign of the prophet Jonah. It says, for as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh, we need to continue reading because so we could get the whole context. The men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation and shall condemn it, because they did not repent at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, a greater than Jonah is here. So it says that this Nineveh will condemn this generation. This generation, it says, because they didn't repent at the preaching of Jonah. Because they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, a greater than Jonah is here. He then brings another sign, because he says this is the sign. It says, the queen of the south shall rise up in judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it, because she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here. So look at what he's saying. The preaching of Jonah, the wisdom, to hear the wisdom of Solomon, this is the sign that he's emphasizing on. The 3 days and 3 nights and the preaching of Jonah is the entire experience that Jonah has. His emphasis on the 3 days and 3 nights is not telling you that how long he's going to be in the whale. It's telling you the experience that he is going to endure when he preaches this message as a sign. But let me first just solidify the point before we come back and look at this terminology, heart of the earth. We're going to break this term down, and then we're actually going to go to Jonah to see what he's talking about. In fact, what he is referring to with the experience of Jonah, to see if it matches up with his own. So let's look at this. Luke chapter 11. Let's go to the same instance in the book of Luke, verse 29. It says, and when the people were gathered thick together, he began to say, and this is an evil generation. They look for a sign. There shall no sign be given but the sign of Jonah the prophet. Look at what it says in verse 30. Because Jonah was a sign to the Ninevites. As Jonah was a sign to the Ninevites. How was he a sign to the Ninevites? Because he was in the belly of the whale? No, because he was preaching. Jonah was a sign to the Ninevites, so shall also the Son of Man be to this generation. And then he starts continuing to talk about the preaching method. He says here, the queen of the south will rise up in judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them, because she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, hear the preaching of Solomon, and she received it. Verse 32, the men of Nineveh shall rise up in judgment with this generation and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And behold, a greater than Jonah is here. Why are they going to condemn them? Because this generation that he's referring to is not repentant. They are not repentant, like the Ninevites were. The sign was the experience of Jonah, the reflection of Jonah's life. The 3 days and 3 nights we're going to see in the whale, we're going to see that it's correlating with the experience of the sign of the preacher, of the prophet, that he's going to have a reflection of what Jonah went through. He is going to manifest that same experience. And yes, it does incorporate his death, but the 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale is not it's not referring to simply the time that he is in the whale only. And we're going to see the Messiah reveal this. The Messiah is going to reveal this. So very quick, it says again, Jonah was a sign unto the Ninevites with preaching. He said, this is the only thing that you're going to see. You're going to see the preaching. You're going to see the miracles. You're going to see the teaching. The result of this generation being wicked is not like the other examples that he mentioned. There is no repentance that's going to occur. Something else is going to occur. There's going to be a betrayal. There's going to be a suffering. There's going to be a killing. And then there's going to be a resurrection. This is not what happened at Nineveh. This is not what happened when the queen of the south came to see Solomon. You see? So this is why they're not going to receive any sign except for the same thing that the prophets has done. Jonah has preached. Solomon has preached. And a greater than Solomon is here. So what does heart of the earth refer to? Many people say that it's a Hebrew idiom for the grave. There is no Hebrew idiom that uses the term heart of the earth to talk about the grave. Secondly, we already established that the Messiah is not going to speak to the Pharisees and scribes or to the multitude in plain language or with Hebrew idioms that they are familiar with. He is going to speak in a manner in which they will not understand, because it was not given to them to understand the kingdom at this moment. So we have to understand this point. So what is he referring to when he's going to be in the heart of the earth? The word heart is not a reference to, we could just, let's break this down. So looking at Matthew chapter 12, verse 40, let's see if we could break this down a little bit. All right. So the word heart is G2588. It means the thoughts, the feelings, and the mind. The thoughts, the feelings, and the mind. Our minds is our character. Our mind is our nature. We are transformed by the renewing of our mind. We are renewed in our mind. You know, all of these things. We are transformed from a carnal mind to a spiritual mind, but he is referring to the mindset, the feelings, the thoughts, and the state of man, because the word earth, or the state of the earth, the word earth, of course, it's the word guy, which is referring to the physical land, but it's also used in scripture to refer to inhabitants. So the nature of the inhabitants, he is captured by the dominion or the mindset, the plans of man, the plans of the earth, or the inhabitants of the earth. Why? I'm going to show you, I'm going to prove this, because with this experience that Jonah had, we're going to see also that other people had the same experience. The reason why I'm going to go to the book of Jonah is to show the whole experience, so we won't be restricted to just thinking that 3 days and 3 nights is talking about just being in the belly's whale. There's a whole experience that he went through. And this is what he's going to reiterate when we see the scriptures talking about when he's going to raise. He's going to mention not only his death, he's going to mention the things that occurred before his death as being incorporated in those 3 days and raising on the third day. So let's look at this. Did Jonah have the same experience? Is the whale, the experience with the water and the whale correlating with the Messiah's experience? The first thing I want to bring out is, how did Messiah explain or break these things down? The disciples also had trouble understanding as well. So let's look at that real quick before we go to Jonah. Luke chapter 18, verse 35. It says, well, let me see that. Luke 18, verse 34. Let me see that. It says, they understood none of these things, and this saying was hid from them, neither knew they the things which were spoken. So he's speaking to them, and they still couldn't quite understand what he's referring to. If you go further down, after his resurrection in Luke chapter 24, something happens where that includes the scriptures. It says here in verse 44, he said to them, these are the words which I spake to you while I was yet with you, that all the things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses, in the prophets, and in the Psalms concerning me. I want to point out the Psalms because I want to bring out Jonah the prophet, and I'm going to bring out David's statements, and they're going to correlate with the experience that we're referring to with the 3 days and 3 nights. So let's understand this. So far we understand that the heart of the earth is talking about the mind state or the nature or the to be in or captive to whatever man can imagine in his mind, which we clearly see when they were taken, they did whatever they wanted to do with him. Whatever was in their mind is what they wanted to do with him. Before that, they could not touch him. I want to bring this point out. They could not touch him before the hour was come. Let's look at a few verses just so we could have that in mind. John chapter 7, verse 30. It says, then they sought to take him, but no man laid hands on him because his hour was not yet come. John chapter 8, verse 20. These words spake Yahushua in the treasury, and as he taught in the temple, no man laid hands on him, for his hour was not yet come. Let's look at a few more. Luke chapter 4, verse 28 to 30. It says, and all they in the synagogue, when they heard these things, they were filled with wrath. They rose up and thrust him out of the city. They led him unto the brow of the hill whereon their city was built, or the mountain where their city was built, and that they might throw him over head first. But he passed through them in the midst of them, and he went away. Why? Because it was not his hour. His hour has not yet come. Let's go to John chapter 16, and we're going to see John chapter 16, verse 32. It says, behold, the hour comes and is now come, that you shall be scattered every man of his own, and shall leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, because my Father is with me. So this is what he's saying. Now it's time for them to scatter, him to be taken. What does it mean when he's taken? When he's taken, it means that he is in the hands of the enemies. He's in the, when it says the heart of the earth, he's in the hands of the inhabitants of the earth to do whatever's in their mind, whatever's in their heart. This is what's going to happen. So let's continue to look at this. I'm trying to think of whether or not we should go through the experience with Jonah or explain it first with Messiah's words. Because we clearly saw in Luke 24, verse 44, it says that he went through the prophets as well as the Psalms. So I want to bring out David's Psalms to show that it's the same experience of Jonah, which is the same experience as the Messiah. But I want to point out the Messiah first. Messiah said that he's going to raise on the third day. The third day, just to establish it, Mark chapter 16, verse 9. It says, Yahushua was risen early the first day of the week. He appeared first unto Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 devils. One of the misunderstandings about the 3 days and 3 nights is they have this idea that he has to be in the grave for an entire 72 hours. We did a study on the 12 hours of the day, according to John chapter 11, to show that there is no 60-minute increments of time that they kept. They did not keep that. They followed the sundial. So they had 12 points of the sun that they watched or they observed in order to understand what part of the day they were in. They did not keep 12 60-minute increments. But when people say he has to be in the grave for 72 hours, what does that mean? If you're somewhere for a complete 72 hours, that is 3 whole days and nights. That means that the next minute or the next time frame is going to be the 4th day. If you are in the grave for 72 whole hours, the next day is the 4th day. But when does Messiah say he's going to raise? When does he say he's going to raise? Let's look at this. Let's go to Luke. Let's go to a few verses, actually. Luke 24, looking at verse 20 and 21. It says, now the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and have crucified him. It says, but we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. And beside all this, today is the 3rd day since these things were done. This is the 3rd day. This is not after the 3rd day. This is a situation where the Messiah resurrected and he was going to Emmaus and he was walking with those 2 brothers that was going to Emmaus. And as he was speaking with them, this is what they're relaying to him, that Messiah died and that they were expecting that actual day, the 3rd day, for him to raise. Not after 72 hours, but the 3rd day. Let's look at a few more verses. Matthew 27, verse 64. The Pharisees go to Pilate to get the authority to have somebody watch the tomb. And look at what he says. Command, therefore, that the tomb be made sure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples come by night and steal away and say to his people, he is risen from the dead, so that the last error shall be worse than the first. So they came because they understood the message that he was given, that on the 3rd day, something was going to occur on the 3rd day, not after 72 hours, which would be the 4th day. It was going to happen on the 3rd day. So why did he say 3 days, 3 nights in the belly of the whale? Well, he's giving you an experience. He's giving you a parable, a figure of speech of how he's correlating his situation with the situation with Jonah. And we're gonna look at that in a second. But let's solidify some more ideas. If we go to, let's go to Luke. Let's go to Luke 24, looking at I think we did look at verse 20 and 21, where the road to Emmaus, they said today is the 3rd day and Messiah is already there walking with them on this 3rd day. Further down, Luke 24, I think verse 46, it says here, now it starts to give us a little bit more insight. And it says here in verse 46, it is written, and thus it behooved the Messiah to suffer and to rise from the dead the 3rd day. So here we see suffering is incorporated in the 3-day timing. So he's going to suffer and raise from the dead on the third day. So you see the correlation. It didn't say he's going to die and raise on the third day, but that he was going to suffer and raise from the dead on the third day, incorporating the suffering time in the 3-day time sequence. Let's see if this is, let's stay on this chapter real quick. Let's go up to verse 5 to 7. It says here, and as they were afraid and bowed down their faces to the earth and said to him, why do you seek the living among the dead? It says here, he is not here, but he is risen. This is what the angel is saying to the women that went to the tomb. It says, remember how he spoke to you when he was here in Galilee, saying, now listen to this in verse 7, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men. This is very important. He's in the hands of sinful men. This is exactly what I said about the heart of the earth. He's in the hands of sinful men to do whatever they want to them. The heart of the inhabitants, he is in the hands of the men of the earth, the ungodly men. It says, the Son of Man must be delivered in the hands of sinful men, be crucified, and the third day rise again. So the 3-day time frame incorporates the time that he was delivered in the hands of sinful men. This is going to make things a little bit more clear as far as how to count this 3 days. Let's go to a few more just to see solidify this idea of him suffering. Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20, looking at verse 18 and 19, look at what it says. Behold, we go up to Jerusalem. It says, and the Son of Man shall be betrayed unto the chief priests and unto the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death, and shall deliver him to the nations to mock, and to scourge and crucify him, and the third day he shall rise again. Look at all of these things that must happen within those 3 days. He's going to be betrayed, which happened that night of the Passover. He's going to be betrayed. He's going to be given to the chief priests. He's going to be condemned to death. Then he's going to be given to the nations, the Gentiles. They're going to beat him and scourge him. They're going to crucify him. And the third day, he's going to rise again. All of these things is what needs to happen within those 3 days. And we're going to see that it fits perfectly the way that it is. Nobody had to come around and fix this idea. This idea was perfect according to the way scripture is. Let's continue to look at these verses just to solidify the suffering aspect. The suffering aspect is very important to the sign of Jonah, because we're going to see how it correlates. And we're going to look at the Psalms, just like Messiah looked up the Psalms to show his disciples all the things that concerned him. All the things that concerned him. Of course, we understand the suffering that occurred in Isaiah 53, but we're going to take a look at that prophecy as well to show the same things, the suffering, the death, and the resurrection in Isaiah chapter 53 as well. Let's take a look at Luke 18 real quick. I think we looked at that already, but just in case. Luke 18, verse 31 to 33. It says, behold, we go to Jerusalem. Okay. And it says, all these things which are written by the prophets concerning the Son of Man must be accomplished. He shall be delivered delivered unto the nations, the Gentiles, shall be mocked and spitefully entreated and spit on. They will scourge him, put him to death, and the third day he shall rise. So again, too many verses showing that Messiah himself is explaining that within those 3 days, he is going to be betrayed, captured, beaten, before he gets killed. And all of those things is what's going to occur within those 3 days. All right. Let's take a little time to look at Isaiah 53 as well, because I want to point out that this was mentioned in the prophecy of Isaiah, which is many times they keep saying it was written. So let's look at where it was written. Isaiah 53, starting at verse 7 to 10. And let's watch this closely. Look at this. It says, he was oppressed, right? He was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. This is exactly what we see in the Gospels. He was brought as a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. This is why they were telling him, speak for yourself. Pilate was telling him, you don't have nothing to say, speak for yourself. It says he was taken from prison. Remember, that's where the nations put him, from judgment. Who shall declare this generation? He was cut off from the land of the living. So now he wasn't only suffering, he wasn't only oppressed and beaten, he wasn't only thrown in jail, but he also was killed. Cut off from the land of the living, for the transgression of my people was he stricken. He made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was there any falsehood or deceit in his mouth. Look at what verse 10 says. It pleased Yah to bruise him, and he hath put him to grief, when you shall make his soul a sin offering for sin. He shall see, now look at this, after all of this, he shall see his children. Why does it say his children? Well, because he's referred to as an everlasting father. When it talks about his children or his seed, it's referring to the people that he's guiding, that he's leading, which is Israel. He's leading Israel. So it says, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days. How shall he prolong his days if he was cut off from the land of the living? Because he's going to be raised from the dead. That's how he will prolong his days. Now he is going to be at the right hand of the Father forever, everlasting. The pleasure of yahuah shall prosper in his hand. So you see all of these things that's happening to him, and then there's going to be a time in which he will be able to see his people, prolong his days, and everything that Yah wants to be done will be in his hand. This is a perfect correlation to what we've been talking about. The suffering right here, the affliction, right? The oppression and the affliction that Messiah goes through during the time that he was on trial, the prison when he was given to the nations, when he was given to the Romans, and the death of the crucifixion, when he died on a tree, for the people, and then the resurrection where he'll be able to see and be blessed by Yah to continue to prosper everything that Yah wants to be done through him. This is very clear. I'm not sure how you can take Messiah out of Isaiah 53. But now that we see these things, I want us to be very careful. Now that we see these things, the 3 days and 3 nights, according to Messiah's teaching of them, incorporated his suffering along with him being suffering, him being given to the nations, him being killed, and then him raising on the 3rd day. Him being raised on the 3rd day. So we saw that the heart of the earth meant that he was in the hands of the people of the earth, the ungodly people of this earth, to work and do whatever they want to do to him. This is what was going on. So now I want us to take some time. Let's go look at Jonah to see how the experience of the whale and the preaching is the sign that he was going to have. Let's look at this. Let's go to Jonah. We're going to start at chapter 1, and we're going to look at some correlations between him being given into the hands. Because remember, we went through all the verses that says they did not lay their hands on him because it was not yet his time. His time has not yet come. So check this out. Verse 7 of Jonah chapter 1, we're going to read down. It says, and they said, everyone to his fellow, come, let us cast lots, that we may know for who caused this evil upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, we beg you, tell us, why has this come upon us? What's your job? Where you come from? What's your country? Who's your people? He says, I am a Hebrew and I fear yahuah. It says, the Elohim of heaven, which have made the sea and the dry land. He says, then were the men exceedingly afraid and said to him, why have you done this? For the men knew that he fled from the presence of Yah, because he told them, right? So he's explaining these things to them. Then they said to him, what shall we do to you that the sea may be calm to us? For the sea wrought and was tempestuous. He said to them, take me and cast me forth into the sea, so shall the sea be calm to you, for I know that for my sake this great tempest is upon you. So he's telling them to take him. He put himself into their hands. They're going to take him, and after they take him, they're going to put him in the water. This is what is occurring, right? Not only are they going to put it in the water, they put it in a tempestuous waters. So you look at Messiah going into their hands, because they could not put their hands on him until that night, Passover night. They put him, he went in their hands willingly. And then they took him to trial, and then they gave him to the nations. The nations, through scripture, was usually referred to as the sea. When you go to Daniel chapter 7, those beasts were the nations that rose out of the sea. Likewise, in Revelation 17, it says that the woman sits on the sea or the waters, and the waters represents a multitude of people, nations, and kindred and tongues. So the water is representing the nations, and these people are representing someone else. They take them into their hand, and then they put them into the water, and then this is when his experience comes to play. Let's watch this. So as they continue to, instead of just taking them right away, what they did was they try to row, and they try to beat the thing. They try to beat the storm, but they could not. So he says in verse 15, it says, so they took up Jonah, and they cast him forth into the sea, and the sea ceased from her raging. Then the men feared yahuah exceedingly, and offered a sacrifice unto yahuah and made vows. So when he saw that the wrath of Yah, the storm, was coming, he sacrificed himself, and he calmed that wrath. It definitely was the wrath of Yah, because that storm was only there because Jonah was running away from him. But according to correlate the story, because Messiah says this is the sign that he's going to give him, and he utilized this experience with the whale. So he says, now prepare the great whale. Now, why did he prepare the whale for 3 days, 3 nights? We're going to see. Jonah chapter 2. How will he be able to be in the water? If the water is a symbolism for ungodly men of the nations, if the water is a symbol for ungodly men, how will he be able to fulfill that symbol being in the water? Unless he was preserved in the water. So Yah set up a fish to preserve him in the water. Now watch the language that he talks about. Jonah is not talking about the whale at any point in time, the fish's belly. He's talking about being in the water. Now watch this. Jonah chapter 2 now. So it says here, I cry by reason of my affliction unto yahuah, and he heard me out of the belly of the grave. That's what he says, the belly of the grave. And he heard my voice, and you have cast me into the water, the deep, in the midst of the seas. And the floods, and I want you to listen to this, because we're going to go to David, and David's going to use the same language. The floods surrounded me. Your billows, or your waves, and your waves passed over me. He's talking like as if he's not even in the whale. He's just, his mindset is, his focus is on the water, the understanding of what the water represented. It says, then I am cast out of your sight, yet I will look again towards your holy temple. It says, the waters surrounded me, even to the soul. The depth closed me about, the weeds or the seaweed wrapped around my head. I went down to the bottom of the mountains, and the earth with her bars was around me forever. Yet have you brought up my life from corruption, O Yahuwah, my Elohim. It says, when my soul fainted within me, I remembered Yahuwah, and my prayer came into your holy temple. And this kind of correlates with the Messiah praying while he was on the tree. And then it talks about the fish vomited him out. Of course, you could correlate that with the resurrection as well. But look at the language. He's in the water. He's cast into the deep. He's surrounded by the floods. I need you to remember this. He's surrounded by the floods and by the waves, right? And he's also cast away out of his sight. The waters surrounded him. So let's look at the Psalms to see those things that pointed to Messiah as well. So we see the experience of Jonah, and now we're going to look at the experience of the Psalms, the psalmist, the David, to see if it correlates together. All right. All right. So the first thing is that let's look at this. Why was he let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 22. Look at what it says here in verse 4-7. It says, I will call on yahuah, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies, right? From my enemies. Look at how he describes it. The waves of death surrounded me. The floods of ungodly men made me afraid. The sorrows of the grave surrounded me about, and the traps of death prevented me. In my distress, I called upon Yahuwah and cried to my Elohim, and he did hear my voice out of his temple. Now, I understand that they're saying that the Psalms, that he didn't read Samuel, he read the Psalms. So I just want to make sure that we understand where the Psalms come from. When you read Samuel, you're going to see that a lot of the Psalms come from it. But let's go to the Psalms, because this is what Messiah read to the disciples when he resurrected. He said he went to Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms to reveal all those things that concerned him, because they were still confused about his resurrection. Let's go to Psalms 18. Look at what it says in verse 4. It says here, the sorrows of death surrounded me. The floods of ungodly men made me afraid. The sorrows of hell surrounded me about, and the snares of death prevented me. Let's go to another Psalm, Psalm 69. Psalm 69 says this in verse 14 and 15. It says, deliver me out of the mire, and which is muddy water. Let me not sink. Let me be delivered from them that hate me, and out of deep waters. So the people that hated him, his enemies, is also referred to as deep waters. Once again, let's look at Psalms 93, verse 3 and 4. It says, the floods have lifted up, O Yahuwah, the floods have lifted up their voice, and the floods lift up their waves. The yahuah on high is mightier than the noise of many waters. I'm going to show a correlation of the many waters. Many waters, yea, than the mighty waves of the sea. It says that Messiah is mightier than the noise of many waters. Let's go to Revelation 17 real quick, just to see a correlation. It says that the woman, let me see. It says here, verse 15, the waters which you saw, where the whore sits, are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. The waters which the whore sits on, I think it's right here. No, further up. Here we go. Verse 1, it says, the great whore that sits upon many waters. Many waters. And that's exactly what I pointed out in Psalms 93, where it says that your Yahuwah on high is mightier than the noise of many waters, or many nations, or many people. It doesn't matter. So when we see, this is the same language that we see. And I just want to correlate that just in case we missed it. I don't want you guys to have to pause it and go back. So let me point it out. The sorrow of death surrounded me. The floods of ungodly men made me afraid. The sorrow of the grave surrounded me. The snares of death prevented me. Ungodly men is waters, according to the way that they described it, the way that Psalms describe it. Let's look at let's go back to Jonah just to correlate these words. Sorrows of death surrounded me, floods of ungodly men. Let's go back to Jonah, chapter 2. Look at what he says. It says, for you have cast me into the deep, in the midst of the sea. The floods surrounded me about, the billows and the waves passed over me. It says here in verse 5, the waters compassed about me, even to my soul. Right? What else did he say about he used the water as a reference to the grave. It says the belly of the grave, and he was referring to the waters. Cast me into the deep, the midst of the sea. So the waters was the belly of the grave. One interesting fact, right, is the difference, right? So here it says here, this word belly, when it says the belly of the grave, it's talking about the womb or in being inside something. But here, when it says the belly of the fish, it's talking about a stomach. So this is a narration. Jonah prayed unto yahuah, his Elohim, out of the fish's stomach. And then when he started speaking, he did not mention the fish's stomach. He mentioned being in the water. He mentioned being in the midst of the water, being surrounded by the floods. The waves are over his head, the water surrounding around him all the way to his soul. And that Yah didn't allow his life to see corruption. Let's go back to Psalms 22 real quick. I don't want you guys to miss this. The waves of death surrounded me. The floods of ungodly men made me afraid. The sorrows of hell surrounded me. The snares of death prevented me. This is very important for us to see. Okay? So we've taken this, going back to Messiah, just looking at, let's go back to Luke 18 just to see what he meant. And then we're going to do a count. Luke 18, looking at verse 31. Look at what it says again. He told the 12 disciples, he says, behold, we are going to Jerusalem. All the things that was written by the prophets concerning the Son of Man shall be accomplished. And this is what he's going to point out. He will be delivered to the nations. He shall be mocked. He shall be spit on. They shall scourge him. He will be put to death. And the third day he shall rise again. I want to point out something that incorporates the Jews as well. There we go. Luke 24, verse 20 and 21. The chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. Right? But let me see if I can find the more detailed one. It says the Messiah to suffer, rise from the dead. Again, the suffering and being incorporated. I want to make sure that we get this. So I'm going to, because this is not, you're not really going to hear this perspective or these verses. Matthew 20 is the verse that incorporates everything. It says, we're going to go to Jerusalem. Son of Man shall be betrayed unto the chief priests, unto the scribes. They will condemn him to death. Then they're going to take him and deliver him to the nations. This is Jonah being taken by the men of the boat, being thrown into the sea or delivered to the nations. He was scourged, crucified, and then on the third day, he will rise again. The third day, he will rise again. Okay. With this said, I'm going to see if I can find, let me see if I can find, give me one moment. All right. So I hope you guys can see this. I just want you guys to get a visual. Passover was prepared at the evening of the 14th. The evening of the 14th is at the end of the day. The shaded areas is the night. The light areas is the day. If you want to go find out more about this, send me some questions. If you want to know this sequence, you can look at the video of the timing of unleavened bread, Passover unleavened bread. I have it coming out, so that way you guys could take a look at this. So Messiah asked them to prepare the Passover at the 14th evening. This is what it says in in the Torah, and they ate it that night of the first day of unleavened bread. That night of unleavened bread, they went to the Garden of Gethsemane. This is where he was betrayed. He was betrayed, and he was taken all the way up to the morning when he was brought to Caiaphas. Here is where he was killed during the day of the 15th. When he was killed, they said that the Shabbat was coming near. As it drew near, they took him down, they buried him before sunset, and he was in the grave for the Shabbat. After the grave in Shabbat, he did not raise during the night. He rose early during the day on the first day of the week. 3 days and 3 nights. The time of his suffering started here at night. So this is the time of his suffering. So here, night, day, the time of his suffering, the time that he was crucified, day 1. The day of Shabbat, day 2. This is the night of the 3rd day, and this is the day. This is when he rose up early on the 3rd day. This is 3 days. And he rose on the 3rd day. His experience of suffering started here after he ate the Passover, and he rose on the first day of the week, which is also the Feast of First Fruits. If he's raising any other day besides that, he can't fulfill the first fruits. He is the first fruits. So he rose on the first day of the week, on the Feast of First Fruits. This is how you get 3 days. You have to incorporate his suffering, because this is what Messiah taught about what would occur, especially in Matthew chapter 20. So 3 days, 3 nights in the belly of the whale, the sign was that he was going to reflect the experience that Jonah had. But not only that, he was also going to reflect the experience that Solomon had. He's greater than Jonah, greater than Solomon. There was differences. The difference was Nineveh repented. Queen of Sheba repented. But the generation did not repent, but killed him. So we have to look at the whole picture. Heart of the earth is not a literal term. It meant that the sign was going to be the experience that Jonah had, where they took him and threw him in the sea. And as he was in the sea, he was then taken out. The Messiah rose from the dead, and he took the disciples through the prophets and through the Psalms to show all those things that concern him pertaining to his death. We went over all the verses in Psalms that talks about his death. Samuel, we went over Isaiah 53, and we covered his suffering, his death, and his resurrection. Messiah kept talking about his suffering, his death, and his resurrection incorporated in the 3-day count. So for us to say he has to just be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights, that's not mentioned, because we went through all the verses that show that Messiah mentioned his suffering to be incorporated within that 3-day count. And on the 3rd day, he was raised from the dead. I hope that this was a clear, in-depth breakdown of the 3 days, 3 nights. I hope that we saw the suffering, the death, and the resurrection in multiple places. The prophet Isaiah, the book of Psalms, David, just as Messiah did when he resurrected, and he went through those same prophecies to show those things concerning himself and his death. So I hope that this was clear. If there's any questions pertaining to this topic, please send it. We have a lot of Passover videos coming out, and I pray that those would also assist in better learning and better understanding of what's going on with the Torah, Messiah's experience, and what we should do also. So praise Yah. You guys have a blessed day. Shalom, everyone. Shalom, shalom. Thank you guys for joining our study today. I hope that it was edifying. And if you want to support this ministry, you can support us on 4alc.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube page. Click the like button and the notification bell. I hope to see you guys on the next study. Shalom, guys.